game theory predicts exactly what happens when unlimited options meets zero social accountability. I know a lot of men are really struggling these days to understand how women can act in a way that seems so cruel and unfair. But honestly, there shouldn't be anything surprising about women's behavior. The modern woman is a mathematical inevitability given the circumstances of this techno dystopian society we're living in. I'm not trying to excuse any bad behavior because it is still possible to do the right thing when all incentives point in the wrong direction, but I'm just saying, none of this is surprising. So, what is game theory? And what does it have to do with female behavior? Well, game theory is basically the study of how people make decisions when the outcome of those decisions depends not only on their own choices, but also on the choices others make as well. Basically, it's a way for autistic nerds to quantify human behavior. I actually studied game theory formally when I was doing my master's degree in computer science. It was a big part of the artificial intelligence course I took. Now, that was just one class. I am certainly not an expert, but it's actually pretty simple to apply certain concepts I learned about game theory to better understand modern women's behavior. Like, why does it seem like even below average looking women always have outrageously high standards for which men they're willing to date? Why are completely normal, average men seen as ugly these days? Why does it seem like monkey branching is the default female dating strategy? If you don't know what monkey branching is, basically it's just a way of saying that women tend to always have their next boyfriend already lined up before they break up with their current boyfriend. Well, all of these things just make sense once you understand game theory. By the way, we can also use game theory to explain why so many men these days are opting to more or less just drop out of society. So I will touch on that briefly as well. A lot of you have probably heard of the prisoner's dilemma. It's kind of the go-to example that's always used to introduce game theory. But for those that aren't familiar, let's think of this in terms of a romantic relationship. So you've got two people, a man and a woman. We'll call them Wojak and Stacy. And let's say each of them are presented with two options. Let's say each is approached by an attractive member of the opposite sex that wants to have relations with them. So they can either choose to stay faithful or they can choose to betray their partner by cheating. So obviously, we're really simplifying things here, but stay with me. There are four possible outcomes depending on which choice each member of the couple makes. The best overall outcome for the sake of Wojak and Stacy's relationship would, of course, be if they both choose to stay faithful. Neither of them would have any reason to feel guilt. There would be no potential for anybody to find out that anybody cheated. No one has to worry about any gossip getting around. It's just the best overall outcome for everybody. That's what you call a healthy, trusting relationship. But here's where the dilemma kicks in. Stacy knows that if she betrays Wojak while he chooses to stay faithful, then she very well might just get away with it. But even if she doesn't, now she has the option to upgrade to a partner with a higher SMV, sexual market value. So from Stacy's perspective, that would be the ideal situation. Likewise, from Wojak's perspective, if he chooses to betray Stacy, but Stacy remains faithful, that means that Wojak would get to have some fun on the side while still hanging on to his loyal main chick. So Wojak and Stacy both have incentive to betray. By the way, for the sake of this example, let's just assume Wojak and Stacy are like most people. They are primarily concerned with their own self-interest. Okay, so with that said, here's where it gets interesting. If Wojak and Stacy both choose to betray each other, that would result in the worst outcome because both of them would be hiding something. There would be a mutual distrust, a lot of tension, rumors might start circulating. Ultimately, it would probably lead to a breakup, and it would probably lead to damaged reputations for both of them when others in their social group find out that they cheated on each other. So, cooperating and staying faithful to each other would be a beneficial outcome for both parties. And if they both betray each other, that's the worst outcome. But the optimal outcome from each person's perspective is if they betray their partner while the other remains loyal. So now that we understand all the possible outcomes, what does game theory tell us? Well, according to game theory, the mathematically best choice for each individual to make in this scenario is to betray. The safe choice and the most moral choice would be for both to stay faithful, but from Stacy's perspective, her optimal choice is to betray because she doesn't know what Wojak will choose. Now, this particular scenario actually has too many variables to really fit into the classic prisoner's dilemma format. I just wanted to make it fun using Wojak and Stacy, but maybe it makes more sense if you look at it like this. Let's say for each outcome, Wojak and Stacy each will gain somewhere from 0 to 2 points. Okay, and these points just represent how beneficial the outcome is. More points is better. So if they both stay faithful, each would receive 1 point. If either of them betrays while the other stays faithful, the betrayer will receive 2 points while the faithful party gets 0 points. But if both choose to betray, then both of them get 0 points. So this is just a way of using numbers to represent the outcomes we already talked about. The important thing to remember here is that game theorists have crunched the numbers, and the conclusion they come to is that choosing to betray is the optimal choice. Even though there's a chance you might get 0 points if you betray, it's still the mathematically optimal strategy. But like I said, this is really an oversimplification. This model only works if Stacy and Wojak are both in the relationship for their own selfish reasons and they don't actually care about each other. But a lot of relationships are like that. And actually, that's a sort of prisoner's dilemma in itself. The fact that neither party knows if the other actually cares about them or if they're just using them. But let's think about a more realistic scenario. In any sort of interaction where there's an infinite or nearly infinite range of possible choices each party could make, and there's also a large range of possible outcomes, game theorists have found that a strategy called the Minimax strategy works well, especially when you aren't very familiar with your opponent or you just aren't able to accurately predict your opponent's moves because people are imperfect, so they aren't always predictable. So this situation applies to a game like chess, but it also applies to competing businesses and it applies to dating. And not only have game theorists found that the Minimax strategy works well in this situation, they've also found that a lot of people naturally default to using the Minimax strategy, even if they don't know that's what they're doing. So, what is the Minimax strategy? The Minimax strategy is all about minimizing the worst possible outcome for yourself rather than trying to maximize the best possible outcome. So, for an average man these days who doesn't have a lot of options, who has had a lot of negative experiences with women in the past, he's been rejected, probably very rudely so. He's been embarrassed. And of course, there's all the crap you get fed by the algorithms about how women are just trying to go about their day in peace. Don't approach women at the gym, blah, blah, blah. And things like women crossing to the other side of the street when they see you coming, which is something I have personally experienced. For an average or below average man, when it comes to dating, The Minimax strategy means that a man's optimal choice might just be to give up. Because, yeah, the best outcome, a man's dream outcome is probably that he'll meet a good woman that will love him back and stay loyal to him, and they can start a family and live happily ever after. That's the dream outcome. But since there's so many unknowns and so many possible choices, the strategy that minimizes the worst possible outcome might be to just stop trying to meet women. You might just give up. The best possible outcome is irrelevant. If game theorists are correct, then the best strategy is to minimize the worst possible outcome. Of course, that depends on what a person's perception is of what the worst possible outcome would be. I think for a lot of men these days, going off our past experiences and with all the psychological demoralization we're constantly getting fed by the algorithms on social media, a lot of men rationally believe that the worst possible outcome might be something really bad. You might just get rejected, which isn't great, but you might get recorded and ridiculed by thousands of people on the internet. You might end up being seen as a creep or a predator. And if we're talking about trying to make a move on a woman that you have regular interaction with, maybe she's a classmate or a coworker, or maybe it's just a girl that you see at the gym sometimes, which, by the way, it makes sense that most relationships probably start with two people that have repeated interactions with each other for one reason or another. But in that situation, most men these days are probably going to perceive that their worst possible outcome is having their reputation ruined in their place of employment or school or at the gym or wherever it is that he knows this woman from. So how do you minimize the chances of that outcome happening? You just don't approach. You just never make a move. And this is also why a lot of guys, even if they do try to make a move, that often comes in the form of simping or in the form of friend zoning themselves, because that way they think, well, I don't want to risk making my intentions fully known because then I would risk the worst possible outcome. But if I just put myself in a position of proximity to this woman that I desire, then maybe I'll get lucky. So, the idea behind that, whether it's conscious or not, the idea there is that at least they're doing something. They're making some kind of move, even if really it has virtually zero chance of paying off. So that's how the Minimax strategy manifests with men. Now let's look at things from the modern woman's perspective. For a woman living in this modern society, there's really not much risk involved with being rejected, because most women have an abundance of options. Men approach them all the time. And also, there's no risk of anyone thinking she's a creep. There's no risk of ruining her reputation. Now, obviously, we don't see women in real life approaching men left and right just because there's very little risk. But that's mostly because that would just be inefficient. A more efficient strategy is just wearing yoga pants that make her ass look juicy and then going about her day and rejecting all the guys she doesn't want while accepting advances from guys that she is interested in. Or better yet, she can just use dating apps and she can sort through her options digitally at her own leisure. So, what is the worst possible outcome that women are trying to minimize? From a woman's perspective, when it comes to dating, the worst possible outcome is for her to have to settle for a guy like me, an average or below average guy. And they think that if they're even seen talking to a less attractive man, or if they show kindness to a less attractive man, then people might get the wrong idea. People might think she's actually interested in that loser, and she's on the same level as he is. So women are also trying to minimize for potential damage to their reputation, the same way men are, But what they're afraid of is being seen as being on the same level as a man that is anything less than Chad, basically. So for women, the Minimax strategy plays out in the form of this very cold, dismissive behavior that most men are probably accustomed to seeing these days. And that's also why women are constantly posting online and talking about how it's not okay for men to approach women at the grocery store, or whatever the case may be. All this discussion that's meant to discourage unattractive men from approaching them because good looking guys are still going to approach regardless, or they're going to match on the dating apps. So they don't have to worry about discouraging the wrong guys. So women are trying to avoid the outcome of reputational damage via association with unattractive men, which just further contributes to making men feel discouraged. But now let's talk about what game theory says about a woman's behavior when that woman is already in a relationship. So when a woman is in a relationship, especially if it's an oofy-doofy relationship, she knows she has all the leverage. So the Minimax strategy might not be relevant anymore because she doesn't really have much to lose. She's not worried about losing her oofy-doofy boyfriend because oofy-doofies are a dime a dozen. And she knows that even if she gets caught cheating or whatever, most people will just believe her if she lies about it. Or she can play the victim angle and say that the guy was abusive or something like that. So there's just very little risk. Now, things are a little different maybe for a woman that's managed to lock down a highly desirable man that is far above her in terms of options. So in that case, the roles might reverse, and we'll see the woman simping for the man and just being totally submissive to him. But typically, a woman in a relationship is going to be the one with the advantageous position. And so typically, she will default to an exploitative strategy. So that's when you see the woman just doing whatever she wants, cheating at will, swiping on Tinder looking for an upgrade while she's sitting next to her husband on the couch. You see dead bedroom situations because the woman knows it's easy to exploit the relative desperation of her partner. Because he is desperately trying to cling on to what he has because women are hard to come by these days for most men. And if anything goes wrong, she knows she can probably just gaslight him or turn on the waterworks and she can easily get out of it. Or if worse comes to worse, she can just offer up 10 minutes of lazy starfish missionary when she knows her man is starving for affection. And that's all it takes to get back in his good graces. So women are incentivized to use an exploitative strategy when dealing with romantic partners. And that's why what we see is women almost always already have a new boyfriend immediately as soon as they break up with the first guy, because they've already been trying to find an upgrade. The exploitative strategy is not a strategy where you try to minimize loss, like with the Minimax strategy. The exploitative strategy is all about maximizing profit, maximizing personal gain. So that's why it seems to be the standard for women that are already in a relationship to be completely open to leaving that relationship for a man that they see as an upgrade. Because that way, she maximizes her own personal gain. That's where the incentive lies. Now, of course, all of this is assuming we have men and women that are mostly selfish. From the perspective of a selfish actor, the strategies I've been discussing are optimal. Unfortunately, I do think most people are ultimately very selfishly motivated. That's just human nature. But there are good people out there that, maybe it's just because these people just don't perceive things the same way. So even quote unquote good people might also just be acting out of their own self-interest. But what I'm trying to say is there are women that are kind to sub 5 men, and there are women that will stay loyal in a relationship even if a man with a much higher SMV comes along. So I'm not trying to say game theory proves that women are evil. I'm not trying to say that at all. There are good people out there of both sexes. They're just greatly outnumbered by everyone else. After my last video, a lot of people were saying I've been radicalized and I'm contributing to the radicalization of young men. Look, I just want to be clear, and this is something I've said plenty of times in several different videos. I don't think that young men should give up. I think that if you're a young man coming up in this broken society, you don't actually have much to lose by trying to look your best and trying to find a way to make a living. Ultimately, nothing's ever going to change if all of us just give up on life. Yeah, the reality of the society we're living in is that chances are you likely will end up chronically alone, but you definitely shouldn't just give up if you're like 22 years old. I know it doesn't feel like it when you're there, but trust me, 22 is extremely young. And even if you are destined to be chronically alone for the rest of your life, you got a lot of time that you can use to try to figure out how to make your life as meaningful as possible on your own terms. Because that's the thing. If society rejects you, then you might as well not play along. Or don't play by the rules, anyways. I'm actually making a meager living now on YouTube. I'm actually living out my dream, and it took me 37 years to get here. But I didn't even start making progress until I accepted that trying to career max and trying to work a regular job, that just was never going to work for a guy like me. I know I'm still probably never going to get married. I'll probably never know what it feels like to be intimate with a woman and to be loved by a woman. But my life is a lot better now than it was 10 years ago when I was actively focusing on all the wrong things. And honestly, I do think life is still worth living. I know I do have it a lot better than a lot of you. I'm not trying to downplay your struggles if you're in a much worse situation than I am. But seriously, it really is better to cope than to do something irreversible. I mean, you gotta at least find out how much they fucked up with Grand Theft Auto 6. And who knows when that's coming out. If you found this video insightful, please consider watching some of my other videos. There's also some secret videos you can watch for free on my Patreon. Videos that YouTube apparently doesn't want you to see. And also, I just opened up a private Discord server for Patreon supporters. So if you're interested, that's there. That's the best way for you to get in touch with me. But thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.